Hugo first sensed something was wrong when Bianca began guarding her phone more obsessively than usual. One evening, a strange message preview flashed across her screen, revealing just enough for him to realize it wasn't from a friend. He didn't confront her immediately, but instead chose to stay silent, acting as if nothing had changed. Over the next 3 months, he quietly gathered every clue he could find, tracing her late-night outings, unusual excuses, and hidden conversations. Each new piece of evidence pulled him deeper into a truth he wished wasn't real. Eventually, he discovered that Bianca wasn't involved with just one man, but 5, all overlapping without any of them knowing about the others. The betrayal was devastating, yet Hugo remained calm, determined not to let emotion cloud his judgment. Instead of exposing her right away, he began planning a response that would strike at the perfect moment. Hugo spent the first week after his discovery trying to steady his emotions, forcing himself to think strategically instead of impulsively. He understood that confronting Bianca without undeniable proof would only give her room to twist the story, so he committed to gathering everything with absolute precision. He began by mapping out her weekly schedule, noting every recurring outing, every vague excuse, and every sudden work emergency she used as cover. He installed a small tracker on her keychain, not to invade her privacy out of spite, but to confirm the places she repeatedly visited. The coordinates formed a pattern, leading him to cafes, hotel lobbies, and quiet neighborhoods where she rotated through her hidden relationships. Each location corresponded with a different man, and Hugo slowly learned their identities through subtle observations, receipts, and overlapping timelines. He created a private folder, storing screenshots, call logs, timestamps, and photos, making sure everything was dated and organized. Every detail was preserved carefully, because he knew Bianca had a talent for manipulation and denial. During this time, Hugo kept his demeanor calm at home, pretending not to notice her growing recklessness. Bianca, confident that she was getting away with everything, became bolder, even careless, which only made collecting evidence easier. Hugo would watch her leave for a yoga class, and then track her directly to a rooftop cocktail bar where she met another man. He would hear her say she had dinner with coworkers, while she was actually with someone entirely different. Instead of letting anger consume him, Hugo focused on building a response that would be both undeniable and unforgettable. After identifying all 5 men, he researched each one meticulously. He discovered that each believed they were in an exclusive relationship with Bianca, unaware that they were part of a hidden rotation. Hugo then crafted his invitation plan. He reached out to each man individually, choosing words with surgical precision. He didn't reveal the truth immediately, but framed the conversation as if Bianca wanted to finally go public, with their relationship at Hugo's upcoming birthday party. The men were confused at first, but Hugo's calm tone and the promise of clarity convinced them to attend. Some were hesitant, some curious, and some even excited at the idea of commitment, but all eventually agreed to show up. Hugo scheduled their arrivals to be staggered, ensuring the impact would build one reveal at a time. The more he prepared, the more he realized he wasn't just planning a confrontation, but crafting a turning point in his own life. He rehearsed his words, visualized the moment, and strengthened his resolve. This would not be an outburst fueled by heartbreak. It would be a controlled, deliberate unveiling of truth that no one, not even Bianca, could escape. By the time the birthday approached, Hugo had every detail ready. The evidence, the timing, the guest list, and the perfect place for the truth to explode. All that remained was to wait for the night when Bianca's lies would collapse in front of everyone she thought she could deceive. The morning of the party began with an unsettling calm that Hugo couldn't quite shake, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Bianca moved around the apartment with an unusual confidence, humming lightly while fixing her makeup, completely unaware of the storm waiting for her. Hugo observed her quietly, noting how she seemed almost eager for the evening, not because it was his birthday, but because she believed she would finally gain control over the narrative of their relationship. Throughout the day, she sent a series of messages to her friends, painting Hugo as inattentive and weak, preparing them to sympathize with her dramatic announcement. She even rehearsed lines under her breath, practicing the tone she would use to humiliate him in front of everyone. Hugo watched without reacting, reminding himself that the more she prepared to embarrass him, the more powerful the reversal would be. As guests began arriving that evening, Hugo welcomed each person with warmth and composure, maintaining flawless hosting etiquette while assessing the room. Family members mingled with close friends, exchanging stories, laughing, and enjoying the comfortable atmosphere. Bianca thrived on attention and made sure she was at the center of every conversation, subtly portraying Hugo as distant and unappreciative. She wore a dress more suited for a nightclub than a birthday gathering, clearly intended to draw eyes and reinforce her sense of dominance. But behind her facade, small signs of impatience surfaced, glancing at her phone too frequently, adjusting her hair compulsively, and packing subtly whenever she thought no one noticed. Hugo knew she was waiting for the perfect moment to deliver her prepared monologue. As dinner ended and the cake was brought out, Bianca seized her opportunity. She clinked a glass lightly, signaling she wanted to speak, and the room fell into a respectful silence. With a self-satisfied smile, she stepped forward, placing a hand theatrically on Hugo's shoulder as if to frame herself as the supportive partner. She began with a few emotionally charged statements about honesty and growth, twisting the narrative to imply that Hugo had been the problem all along. Then, with a dramatic breath, she announced her truth, declaring that she had been unfaithful and was leaving him because he was man enough for her. A murmur of shock rippled through the room, but Hugo remained perfectly still, his expression calm and unreadable. Bianca expected him to crumble, to plead, to lose control in front of everyone. Instead, he simply nodded, thanking her for her honesty in a tone so steady it unnerved even her. The certainty in his voice made her confusion flicker for the first time. She tried to regain momentum, raising her voice to reassert dominance, but the shift in the room's energy was undeniable. Hugo could feel the anticipation building as he prepared for the moment he had meticulously planned. Bianca thought she had already won, but what she didn't realize was that the night and the narrative was about to flip entirely, leaving her exposed in a way she never imagined possible. Hugo took a slow breath, his calm demeanor giving nothing away, and then began to speak. He looked directly at Bianca, his voice steady, measured, and deliberate, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "I think it's time we clarify something," he said, letting a pause stretch just long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of envelopes, each one labeled with a name. One by one, he called out the names of the 5 men Bianca had been secretly seeing. With each name, a sense of disbelief and confusion spread across her face, her confident mask starting to crack. The first man stepped forward, clearly stunned, glancing around to see if anyone else knew about the situation. The second man appeared, equally bewildered, looking at Bianca as though demanding an explanation. The third man froze, caught between shock and embarrassment, realizing that his private affair was now public. The fourth man's expression shifted from curiosity to horror as he slowly understood the pattern. Finally, the fifth man hesitated at the door, then reluctantly entered, his face pale and his posture tense. Each man had believed he was Bianca's only secret, her exclusive partner, and none could reconcile this revelation. Bianca's hands trembled, and her carefully rehearsed confidence faltered as she looked around at the 5 men now standing in the room. Guests whispered among themselves, glances darting from Bianca to Hugo, sensing the drama unfolding in real time. Hugo calmly walked around the room, making sure each man had a clear view of the evidence he had meticulously gathered. Photos, messages, and receipts were casually laid out on the table, undeniable proof that left no room for denial. Bianca's voice cracked as she tried to speak, but no words came out. The script she had planned for humiliation was crumbling. The men, still shocked, began exchanging brief, awkward glances, each silently processing the betrayal and the absurdity of believing they were unique. Hugo addressed the room, his tone firm yet composed, explaining how he had discovered the truth and why he had chosen this moment to reveal it. Every detail was precise, every accusation backed by evidence, leaving Bianca without any means of deflection. Some guests gasped audibly, others whispered in shock, and the room's energy shifted from casual celebration to chaotic confrontation. Bianca tried to regain control, but her voice sounded weak, almost pleading, as the weight of her actions sank in. Hugo allowed a moment for the impact to settle, watching as her composure disintegrated further. The birthday party, which had begun as a celebration, had transformed into a stage for truth and accountability. By the time Hugo finished speaking, Bianca was visibly shaken, her usual arrogance replaced by panic and regret. The 5 men, once unaware and confident, now stood as witnesses to her duplicity, each processing the betrayal in their own stunned silence. Hugo's meticulous planning had worked flawlessly. The room had witnessed the unraveling of a carefully maintained deception. Bianca's facade was gone, replaced by a vulnerability she had never shown in public, leaving her exposed, humiliated, and entirely without control. The party had descended into chaos, but Hugo remained composed, fully aware that this moment marked the turning point he had been preparing for. Bianca stumbled back from the crowd, her face pale and her hands shaking as the reality of the situation hit her. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a strangled whisper, choked with desperation. Family members quickly stepped in, guiding her toward the door, their expressions a mix of disappointment and disbelief. Guests murmured among themselves, some offering sympathetic glances to Hugo, others shaking their heads in shock at the spectacle. Once outside, Bianca's panic escalated. She grabbed her phone and began furiously typing messages to Hugo, demanding explanations, apologies, and, bizarrely, compensation for emotional distress. The texts were relentless, arriving in rapid succession, each more irrational than the last, accusing Hugo of cruelty and betrayal. When she received no immediate response, her messages became even more frantic, shifting from pleading to veiled threats. Bianca then attempted to return to the apartment, pounding on doors and ringing the bell, but her family blocked her path, refusing to allow her back inside. Neighbors and friends who had witnessed the earlier chaos watched cautiously, unsure whether to intervene or maintain distance. Her attempts to enter escalated to a barrage of calls and spam messages, targeting Hugo's social media accounts with false accusations. She publicly posted screenshots out of context, trying to turn the narrative in her favor, but each post only served to further damage her credibility. Even as she sought legal counsel, her demands were illogical and unsupported by any evidence, leaving her attorney increasingly frustrated and skeptical. Hugo, meanwhile, remained composed, refusing to respond to provocations and letting the evidence he had already presented speak for itself. Bianca's inability to regain control created a feedback loop of desperation, each failed attempt amplifying her sense of loss and humiliation. She tried contacting mutual friends to sway public opinion, but most had already witnessed the events firsthand and sided with Hugo. Her messages and calls became more erratic, ranging from pleading for money to making outlandish claims of being victimized. Some friends tried to reason with her, suggesting she step back and reflect, but her pride and panic prevented any rational response. Bianca even attempted to force entry through back doors and side entrances, only to be met with firm resistance from security and concerned neighbors. Every failed attempt fueled her growing paranoia and frustration, leaving her emotionally exhausted and socially isolated. She attempted to contact the 5 men individually, hoping to manipulate them into validating her version of events, but they were already aware of her duplicity. Instead of sympathy, she encountered anger, disappointment, and shame reflected back at her, further intensifying her sense of defeat. Hugo continued to document every interaction, careful to maintain a record in case legal action became necessary. Bianca's online posts and messages, intended to smear Hugo's reputation, only painted her as increasingly irrational and untrustworthy. Her demands became more ludicrous, including requests for financial restitution and apologies, which Hugo categorically refused. Even as the days passed, Bianca's attempts to regain control of the narrative faltered, leaving her isolated from friends, family, and the men she had manipulated. The once confident and calculating woman was now reduced to frantic actions and public embarrassment, unable to escape the consequences of her own choices. Her obsession with retaliation and control trapped her in a downward spiral, each attempt at leverage collapsing under the weight of evidence and truth. By the end of the week, Bianca's panic had reached its peak, and she was left to confront the full scope of her failures without any support or reprieve. Hugo, in contrast, maintained his composure and dignity, observing quietly as the chaos she created ultimately consumed her entirely. The aftermath of the party extended far beyond Bianca's immediate turmoil, touching everyone involved in unexpected ways. The first man, who had been planning a wedding, found himself facing a broken engagement as his fiancée discovered the affair through social media. The second man, previously confident in his exclusive relationship with Bianca, was forced to reconcile with an ex-girlfriend who had been suspicious of his late-night absences. The third man, who had a reputation as a serial dater, saw his secret unravel, leading friends and colleagues to question his integrity and intentions. The fourth man's spouse discovered the deception, immediately filing for divorce, leaving him emotionally and financially vulnerable. The fifth man, who had been close to professional circles, faced social backlash as colleagues learned about his involvement, damaging his reputation and future opportunities. All 5 men were left grappling with the consequences of Bianca's duplicity, each trying to piece together what had happened while managing personal shame and external judgment. Meanwhile, Bianca's family was thrown into chaos. Her father confronted her mother about long-hidden secrets, discovering that her mother had once concealed her own indiscretions, leading to intense arguments and emotional strain. The family dynamic shifted dramatically, with trust eroded and long-standing relationships strained beyond repair. Relatives who had once been close now took sides, creating divisions that had been dormant but were now fully exposed. Bianca's siblings felt betrayed and confused, struggling to reconcile the image they had of their sister with the reality that had unfolded. Friends who had attended the party were torn between empathy for Bianca and admiration for Hugo's composure, creating social tension in previously harmonious circles. The 5 men, each navigating their personal consequences, also experienced ripple effects in their professional and social lives. Some faced ostracism, others had to rebuild damaged relationships, and a few were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about their own complicity in the situation. Hugo's family observed the unfolding events with a mix of concern and respect, recognizing the meticulousness and patience he had displayed. They offered quiet support, ensuring that he maintained balance and perspective amidst the chaos surrounding Bianca and the men involved. Bianca's attempts to regain control extended to calling mutual acquaintances, but her reputation had already begun to precede her, limiting her influence and access. The social fallout extended online as well, with discussions, gossip, and speculation creating a digital footprint that further isolated her. Each man had to navigate his own version of accountability, facing scrutiny from partners, friends, and colleagues who now questioned their judgment. Hugo, in contrast, remained a stabilizing force, using the situation to reinforce trust and transparency with his friends and family. The combination of personal, social, and familial fallout created an environment in which Bianca's previous manipulations were completely undermined. The chaos extended beyond immediate relationships, influencing decisions about work, social gatherings, and family interactions for weeks to come. The five men, initially unaware of the full extent of Bianca's actions, were now forced to adapt to a new reality shaped by exposure and public knowledge. Bianca's family faced deep introspection, questioning past decisions and the culture of secrecy that had allowed deception to flourish. Hugo observed all of this quietly, aware that the long-term effects would be significant, but content that the truth had finally surfaced. The social network Bianca had once controlled unraveled quickly, leaving her isolated and her previous influence diminished. Meanwhile, Hugo's careful planning and composure ensured that he emerged unscathed, maintaining relationships, respect, and personal dignity. By the end of this period, the emotional and social landscape had been irreversibly altered, with Bianca at the center of her own collapse and the five men forced to confront the fallout of their entanglement. Bianca's downward spiral continued in ways she could never have anticipated. Her professional life began to unravel first. Colleagues who had once respected her distanced themselves, and opportunities she had counted on evaporated almost overnight. Her employer, concerned about the negative attention and potential legal complications, terminated her position, citing a breach of trust and workplace decorum. Without a steady income, her financial stability collapsed, forcing her to relinquish the apartment she had so carefully curated. Her car, once a symbol of status, was repossessed after missed payments, leaving her with only the essentials she could carry. As news of her social and romantic entanglements spread, her reputation suffered irreparable damage. Friends she had once relied on refused contact, unwilling to be associated with someone whose duplicity had caused so much chaos. The five men, now fully aware of her manipulations, severed ties, leaving her emotionally isolated and without the connections she had previously used to bolster her sense of control. Bianca, unwilling to accept responsibility, attempted legal action against Hugo, claiming harassment, emotional distress, and financial damages. Hugo, prepared for every angle, countersued, presenting meticulous records of evidence that clearly depicted Bianca's actions and intentions. Her lawyer, seeing the overwhelming documentation and the public sentiment turning against her, eventually withdrew, leaving Bianca without professional representation. She tried to frame herself as the victim in online posts and forums, presenting selective snippets of communication, but her narrative was quickly dismantled by those with first-hand knowledge. Even when she attempted to enter new social circles, the stories of her past behavior preceded her, making it nearly impossible to rebuild trust or form genuine connections. Bianca's attempts at financial recovery failed repeatedly. As former acquaintances refused to lend support and contractual opportunities slipped through her fingers. Eventually, desperation led her to meet a so-called crypto bro, a man who promised quick financial returns but ultimately defrauded her, leaving her in an even more precarious situation. Her living situation became unstable, moving from temporary accommodations to the sporadic generosity of her mother, who herself was wary of the chaos Bianca brought. Emotionally, Bianca deteriorated under the weight of her losses, shifting from anger to depression, unable to reconcile her self-image with the consequences of her actions. Her attempts to regain influence or control over any aspect of her life only exacerbated her isolation and reinforced the social narrative that she was untrustworthy. Even casual interactions became fraught. Neighbors, acquaintances, and former friends treated her with caution, leaving her socially estranged. Every effort to regain financial independence, social credibility, or romantic stability was met with resistance or outright rejection. Bianca's story became a cautionary tale in her social circles, a visible example of how manipulative behavior and dishonesty can lead to long-term consequences. Legal threats, financial ruin, and public humiliation compounded her sense of helplessness, leaving her unable to envision a way forward. Meanwhile, Hugo maintained his life with careful balance, his actions calculated to protect his dignity and ensure that the truth prevailed. The contrast between their trajectories was stark. Bianca's decline was rapid and public, while Hugo's resilience and composure allowed him to rebuild and thrive. By the end of this period, Bianca had lost nearly everything she had once considered essential: job, home, transportation, relationships, and reputation. She became trapped in the fallout of her own choices, each misstep reinforcing the consequences of her earlier deceit. Her attempts to restart or reclaim her life were consistently thwarted by the long shadow of her actions, leaving her in a state of permanent instability. The legal, social, and emotional ramifications converged, cementing her position at the bottom of a life that had once seemed secure and enviable. Hugo, observing from a distance, understood that the consequences were fully deserved, his meticulous planning having ensured that justice, in its own form, was realized. Bianca reached out one final time, her messages pleading and apologetic, asking if she could return and make amends. Hugo read them calmly, feeling a mix of pity and resolve, but he knew that reconciliation was impossible after everything that had transpired. He blocked her attempts, maintaining firm boundaries and focusing on rebuilding his own life without distraction or resentment. In the weeks that followed, Hugo began traveling, reconnecting with friends, and exploring new experiences that had been impossible during the months of emotional turmoil. He also sought therapy and personal growth, ensuring that the betrayal he endured would not define his future or his relationships. Hugo gradually entered a new romantic relationship, one built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the chaos Bianca had brought into his life. Meanwhile, Bianca remained trapped in her own consequences, living with her mother and facing the reality of having lost nearly everything she once valued. She became a shadow of her former self, burdened by financial instability, social isolation, and the lingering effects of her poor decisions. The contrast between their lives could not have been clearer. Hugo thriving, rebuilding, and growing, while Bianca struggled under the weight of the chaos she had created. In the end, Hugo found peace, closure, and a renewed sense of purpose, leaving Bianca to confront the full measure of her actions alone.